gentlemen, welcome to Shoot, Punch, Kick, voted the world's #1 podcast in America, where three childhood homies shoot the shit about their favorite 80s and 90s action and horror flicks. Shout out to our moms for voting on that for us.
Thanks, Mom.
Boys, how are you guys doing?
Doing
Fantastic.
well. Ready to tango and ready to cash.
See what you did there. I like it. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Today we are going to be discussing a seminal 1989 classic film, Tango Cash, starring Sylvester Stallone and Kurt Russell. I guess let's start off a little bit with what our personal histories with this film is. I'll go first. I saw this movie when it came out. And it's something that I've always kind of been aware of. I don't think it really resonated with me that much when it came out, which is why I probably only saw it once or twice. I always had a huge crush on Terry Hatcher. So I think right after this movie, she started acting in Lois and Clark. And so I think I retroactively checked out this movie when I found out she was in it. But I have not seen it since then. So basically, I'm seeing this for the first time. Anthony?
Was it? Did it? I didn't realize Lois and Clark came out that soon after. I didn't know that she was even in it until I asked you this last week when we were talking about it. This is my first time watch. I've been familiar with it. The words Tango and Cash have that really popular part of buddy cop movies, like when people
that Tango and Cachet, if you will.
You can say that. Yeah, it's just always been a part of the conversation. But I remember the box very well, but never saw it. There was nothing that really drew me to it, and didn't it just never really came up in the conversations. But this has been on my queue for a long time, so happy to be able to have a reason to watch it.
Awesome. And Telly?
Yeah, I remember seeing the commercials on TV as a kid back in the day. Didn't see it in theaters, but I was living in Hong Kong like 15 years ago. I picked up this French version at a used DVD store for like $4 and watched it for the first time. And I honestly can say I didn't remember anything at all from the movie. So I watched it last night and realized I truly did not remember anything from the movie other than Robert Zadar, the maniac cop, was in it.
Yep, your boy, the
So
Chin.
you remembered the important stuff.
Chin.
The good stuff. All right, so let's just set the table a little bit, give you a little backstory around the time. This movie came out in 1989. It's a buddy cop flick. As a matter of fact, it is the last movie to come out in the 80s. It was released in late December of 89. So, again, it's interesting that this is the last movie that to represent.
Yeah, I wouldn't peg this as like a December release. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
As a matter of fact, I mean, we'll get into it a little bit later, but it came in hot. Like, there were so many rewrites, and I guess they had already announced when the movie was going to come out, and they were editing up until the very last days. I think there's some reference to something being called like the film is still wet or something, I think is the phrase, where basically, by the time they got to the theaters, they were it was like hot off the presses, I guess.
Wow.
I guess we can go into the plot synopsis powered by ChatGPT. Let's see how this does this time around. The synopsis is Tango and Cash is a high-octane action comedy film that follows the adventures of two polar opposite police detectives, Raymond Tango, Sylvester Stallone, and Gabriel Cash, Kurt Russell, who are forced to team up to clear their names and take down a powerful crime lord. Tango, a slick and sophisticated officer, and Cash, a rugged and reckless cop, are both renowned in their respective fields. However, when they're framed for a crime they didn't commit, they find themselves thrown into prison. Determined to prove their innocence, the two sworn enemies reluctantly join forces to escape and bring the real criminals to justice. As they pursue leads and dodge danger at every turn, Tango and Cash engage in an explosive shootouts, thrilling car chases, and witty banter, showcasing their vastly different yet complementary skills. Along the way, they encounter a colorful cast of characters, including Tango's eccentric inventor brother, who aids them with gadgets and weapons. Despite their constant bickering in classes and personality, Tango and Cash form an unlikely bond as they uncover the conspiracy that reaches to the highest levels of power. With time running out and the odds stacked against them, the duo must rely on each other's and their strengths to outsmart their enemies and clear their names once and for all. Tango and Cash is a fast-paced and adrenaline-fueled ride that combines explosive action with comedic moments, making it a beloved cult classic among fans of the buddy cop genre. So, what do we think? How did ChatGPT do?
It wasn't wrong. It was vague as fuck though. Like
Yes,
I didn't dive into literally
very
anything
generic,
that happened. Yes, ChatGPT was like,
accurate but generic. Yeah.
it was a movie
it,
in
it
which
existed.
things happened.
One little note I think that they got wrong is when they talk about Cash's brother being the one that aids them with gadgets,
Oh,
including Tango's
Tango's brother.
eccentric inventor brother,
Oh, that's right.
who
Was that
who
established that he was his brother?
And it would
If
have
it was,
been
I missed
first of
it.
all,
and it would have been Cash, right?
it was
Yeah.
Cash's friend, and also
Yeah.
it's not his brother. Strangely
Okay.
enough, and I double checked this, he works in the police department R&D division.
Mm-hmm.
So he's like the guy in Naked Gun who made the cufflink in the
Yeah, well,
that,
he's supposed to
Frankie
be.
Yeah,
I guess
he's
the
the
Muniz.
analog
Q.
is Q. Yeah,
Yeah.
the analog is Q. Which doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I just, where did they come up with the idea that the police force is sitting there working on, scientific breakthroughs to
Yeah,
help the
that's
police
the second
officers?
half of the movie starts to swerve into like weird places, but we could talk about that later.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Because
yeah.
they
All
do
right,
tee it
so
up, and I was like, "What the fuck was that?" Like
Yeah,
at the beginning
that
where he
same
has
here.
um,
I like
all right.
how ChatGPT, and I'm sure we'll talk about it more. Of the they're polar opposites. Like I didn't get those.
Sworn enemies.
Yes.
The intro wasn't that bad. All right, so I guess a good place to start would be the production. This was a movie that had a very troubled production, from pre-production all the way to post-production. The film had multiple directors. Um, Cole Wachowski was fired by producer John Peters over the tone of the film. Then they brought in Albert Mongoli, who filmed the chase and fight scenes and the ending, to come in and finish up. They were already months in at the time. And then between Magnoli and Kolchovsky, they had another director come in to play the interim part. I guess basically the problem was that the studio wanted this to be a farcical, um, buddy cop, almost like a farce. And it looks like Stallone and Kolovachovsky really wanted it to be a comedic buddy cop film, yes, to be sure. But for it not to be completely ridiculous and over the top, they wanted it to be, can stand up there as a legitimate action buddy cop film and not some kind of comedy. Another issue that was happening as well was that they were going over budget. And the reason they were going over budget, at least according to Kolbachevsky later on, who spoke on it, was because they kept on doing rewrites. They kept on reorganizing the things that they wanted for the scenes. They kept on having to reshoot a bunch of the big stunts, at the behest of the studio. And what he was saying is, if they would have just let me make the movie that I wanted to make and the way I wanted to make it, it would have came in under budget. But every time I got to go back because you decide after looking at dailies that you want to change the direction of the film, it's going to cost money. So anyway, it looks like they used the budget as the reason to fire him. And a couple of things that made mention here is that apparently the Stallone was really responsible for pulling this together, because there were many points where the studio, even though they had already started filming, were looking to pull the plug. But it was really Stallone, credited by both the director and the producers as the lone voice of reason, holding the film together, unofficially working as producer, director, writer, as well as star. Again, there were multiple rewrites because the studio had some issues with the MPAA, with the movie Cobra, its previous Stallone movie. And so again, they ordered them to do edit scenes at the last minute, removing a bunch of the killing, removing a bunch of the violence, um, and to the extent that the trailer has different scenes in it that don't exist in the final cut of the film, right? And apparently, it looks like ultimately the film missed its budget by over 20 million and had to be completely re-edited prior to its theatrical release. They had to go to this guy Baird, who apparently is supposed to be the film like savior when films are like in dire threat of not coming out well, and they bring this guy in to like pull it all together, re-edit it, and kind of get it out there. But it came out at the last minute. It was Warner Brothers Studio complaints on every different cut edited before the final theatrical version. It barely made the deadline and ended up being shipped into theaters in wet print, an industry term meaning that it was barely completed. And so, anyway, the point of all this is to say that, you know, this movie was a movie that didn't really know kind of what it wanted to be, or who it wanted to be, and I think it really shows through in the movie itself. I think when I watched this movie and I started doing the research, all of this stuff made total sense to me. So Dash, what do you? I mean, again, based on what we've just kind of been discussing about the troubles with the production of the film, do you think that it had an effect? Do you see that upon watching the film? What are your thoughts?
No, 100%. This, overall, I don't know if I should give like my impression of the movie overall, but just like it felt a little bit like a mess watching it. A lot going on, a lot of different tones, a lot of different like vibes with it, plot threads starting. It tried to. There was a point where I looked at the time that the amount of the runtime where it was in the playthrough, and because so much had happened, I was like, this has to be like at least an hour and a half into the movie. It was like for barely 40 minutes.
I just
40
want to say,
minutes.
I mean, we can get to it later on when we talk to the scripting, but pacing. But again, this is one of the things that I noticed within the first 20 minutes of the movie, we had established a scene with Stallone and how he's supposed to be a badass. Russell, how he's supposed to be a badass. One quick introduction to the villains, and within the first 20 minutes of the movie, they were already in court for
Yeah,
being
which is
framed. So
like
they,
a whole other like sequence, and I felt like that the movie's like a lot of sequences, but in terms of the production and behind the scenes stuff, looking at it, it seemed like there was hiring that was people wanted to make Beverly Hills Cop. It seemed like the composers from Beverly Hills Cop, some of the like
is it okay? I didn't even notice that.
yeah,
I didn't
that
realize it was. I made
some
that
of
reference up.
the people. Then you have like the
And
cinematographer.
Stallone apparently was the original choice for Beverly Hills Cop. It was going to be
Oh,
a
I didn't
very
know that.
different
That's
movie,
interesting.
and when Eddie Murphy came in, they switched it up. But
Mhm. And you have the cinematographer from Thief. Like this movie was shot incredibly well. So you have this like you can tell the moments that are like serious, they come through, like the blocking's very good, and then like you have it paired with this other tone music and the wittiness that the ChatGPT spoke about. It felt like a lot of people were attempting to be served, a lot of either different audiences, but this seemed like a movie that definitely came together in the edit with a lot of choices that didn't gel together. So hearing the troubled production of it and a lot of the points that you mentioned, like it does make complete sense because all of that shines through in the movie.
yeah,
What do you think, Telly?
absolutely. Yeah, totally agree. As I was rewatching this, even though I didn't remember anything, I could see why I didn't remember anything now because
Yeah.
it's so disjointed. Because within the first like 10, 12 minutes, I was just like checking my watch, and I was doing that a lot during this movie because the pacing is just it's weird in terms of where the beats are. And I'm like, okay, Stallone is not funny.
He's
He's supposed to
not.
be
He's so
funny.
not
Yeah, and he's got
funny.
all those one-liners.
It's so
And
bad.
uh, and I think this was the height of Stallone's powers, also, where he was like leading projects, whether he was the actor or whatever, but he had total control. And I think this was right before he went to his comedy phase, which is kind of bizarre because he can't. He's obviously proven here you can't do comedy. And when you put him next to a Kurt Russell, who's so animated, who's so colorful,
Perfect.
it makes him even look more stiff. But yeah, no, the comedy didn't work at all for me. I didn't like laugh like I mean I think I
It was
laughed
actually
once. I can't
unfunny.
remember.
It was like
Yeah,
actively
it was very
unfunny.
unfunny. It's so yeah, all the jokes and one liners they were just like didn't
Where did
land
you
for
learn to
me.
drive, Stevie
And there was
Wonder?
no, I just didn't feel there was any chemistry at all between Kurt Russell and Stallone either. So
Oh,
yeah, and then yeah, just the humor and then the action and then all the stuff with the villains just felt very cartoonish. And then at the end when they start well actually when they go into the prison and they're walking through the prison hall and there's like things are on fire, it
I hate
starts to
litter.
border on parody, and I'm like, wait, is
Oh
this
yeah.
like
Well,
what's
no, but
going on
again,
here? Because
yeah,
that
yeah.
that's not set up at all, that type of humor. and then it just gets ridiculous with Kurt Russell sleeping on the bottom bunk, and his cellmate
Farting.
is like collapsing in on him. And then at the end, it turns into a monster truck rally with
Yeah, yeah,
the super van that the Q character invents. And I'm like, where is this movie going? But it
yeah,
doesn't.
yeah.
But it doesn't even take that and take it to like take it to 11. It just kind of it's very
Yeah,
muddled in terms
it
of
put
what they
it.
do. But yeah, I'll talk more about the action sequences too, because it looks like they spent a lot of money on the set and the production value, but the action is missing.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
They're like, we'll figure it
absolutely.
out.
I think actually Tyler, that's great that you kind of went in that direction, because that's a great segue for us to kind of talk about some of the performances.
Hmm.
So initially, I think one thing I found that was really interesting was that Patrick Swayze was originally thought of to be Cash, but he dropped out to do Roadhouse, which I think is really for the best. Because for me, I think Kurt Russell is the standout in this movie of all. He's the diamond in the rough. I think without him, this movie really just becomes nearly unwatchable. He's just so great in everything. It seems like where Kurt Russell stands on the pod. I mean, at least based after doing Big Trouble. But I think that he's a real standout. And so I'm really glad. I couldn't see this movie with Patrick Swayze and Stallone. I don't
I think they
think
were
that
casting
Stallone.
based on mullets, so
Yeah,
that's
is that right?
Swayze. Yeah,
What
the
is the
'80s. Swayze and Kurt Russell had similar haircuts.
Yeah.
business in the front, party in the back?
Yeah,
And I'm trying to think in my head of how this movie would have played with Stallone and Swayze, and I just can't see it. And now I think you're right to some degree, Telly, that the chemistry between Stallone and Swayze is stilted, but that is really just comes from Stallone's side. I
yeah.
feel like
Yeah, I
Russell
think
is.
because he was such a big star, and I'm sure, all of us have worked in the business in some form, and the ego that goes with that. It's like, I'm the star of this movie, and Kurt Russell is sort of the supporting actor, right? I just
Mm,
didn't feel like, yeah, it just, there was, Stallone he just felt so stiff in the movie, even though it was like, some of the humor was ingratiating, like the Rambo reference at the very beginning.
yeah, Rambo's a pussy.
He just doesn't lean enough into it, and I think the character also is very boring. It's not an interesting character at all. It's
I
just
mean,
a cop in a suit.
and some of the writing, I think, I don't know if it's him or it's the writing, but also like the jokes aren't funny, even if it was delivered by somebody who was funny. I think like some of the
Yeah.
stuff, there's weird references. Like at one point, he's like, "Oh, would you stop to get a Danish?" And he's like, "I hate Danish." And apparently, that's supposed to be a reference to the fact that he had just gotten divorced from I forget the name of his wife at the time, but she was Ivan Drago's wife.
Yeah,
Oh,
She
Bridget
Bridget
played
Nielsen.
Nielsen.
Bridget
Yeah.
Nielsen, who I think is Danish. Um, like who
Wow,
I don't
deep
know.
cut.
Oh yeah,
Mhm.
like
Yeah.
but somebody in the script was like, "Oh, this is gonna be good. This is
Yeah,
fire."
yeah.
When they hear this, everyone's gonna
Yeah.
crack the fuck up. The whole theater's gonna go, and it's like not really.
You had to be there in 1989, Carlos, in
And even if you were,
December.
I suspect we probably wouldn't have got that reference. I feel like
No.
because I mean, whatever. But Kurt,
They're so
so
they were so similar too. Like I feel like the whole like this is an odd couple pairing was not played up in terms of the story.
Yeah.
So when they come across, you have to like they're doing the same thing. So I think the for me the scene that perfectly like captures the performance of them is when they're in prison in the shower and they're talking about each other's dicks
yeah,
and they basically both have the same insult,
joke.
which
Yeah,
is
you got a small
Yeah.
dick.
and they're going back and forth. There's no one who's really going to get like the upper exchange on that. And Kurt Russell, I was surprised was as good as he was because didn't have anyone
Lots
to
to work
play
with.
off of.
Hmm.
Yeah.
From Big Trouble in Little China, he had so many people that were complete opposites to him, and then you have him as the quipping person. Like the dialogue reminded me of Spider-Man, where it's just him, like quick, small quips against the villain. But with this one, it's another person doing that back at you, and it just became this like, hey, I said something clever. Then this person says something clever. And it just
Hmm.
kept going and it
Yeah.
never went anywhere. It never elevated anyone because they were so like
Because I think
triumphant.
Yeah, I think if Stallone wasn't in this, then that would have been more of a traditional straight man to work off of. We were just talking about Tommy Boy right before we start recording, and that straight man and wild man dynamic, and but you have to be committed. And Stallone still wanted to get the laughs, right? He didn't want to be
Mhm.
the butt of the joke, and I think that's what that to detriment of the film, especially the humor.
You know, the funny thing though is we're talking about Stallone as if he doesn't have comedy chops, and he definitely doesn't in this film. But I feel like if you look at Demolition Man just a few years later, he was funny in that. I don't know if he was funny in that or if
Well,
maybe
I
it's
think
just better
because of the fish out
writing.
of water, the storyline, I think also better directing. That's another thing we'll talk about for this film. I think that the direction also fails the film because as I was
Oh,
watching this, I'm like, I'm pretty sure just from watching the first 20 minutes, I'm like, I'm pretty sure the director is not an American because just the way that the humor is hitting and what the director considers funny, and then you look it up and you realize the director is not really an action movie guy, right? And this is sort of
yeah.
out of his element.
Um.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
I
also
just.
with Demolition Man, he had a nice crew of assortments of personality, and again, like you can't unless even in a Beavis and Butthead with two in like UCB, they call them peas in a pod. Like it's the
Mhm.
same character,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
cheerleaders and SNL. You still have to have someone driving, and the other person just kind of co-signing that person,
Yeah.
and it was just two of the same characters that I'm being told is different being the same at each other, and yeah, the comedy did not
Yeah,
work. It just
the
didn't work
humor
very
also was just the same. You could have just switched their lines. They could have been delivering the same exact lines to each other, like the quips. Yeah, each character. I mean, Kurt Russell was Kurt Russell in this movie, so it wasn't a huge stretch. But yeah, Stallone, I think that's where it kind of it fails the film because he doesn't really define a character, and yeah, the humor just doesn't work off of him.
But I will say
Yeah.
with the performances of the villains, like I feel like my issue with the protagonists and the good guys in this is you could clearly see what they were trying to do and it didn't work. Like you could
No,
see that these were trying to be funny moments and they fell flat. So for me, I was like, man, my takeaway of this was negative. I felt like with the villain part, it wasn't trying to be King Lear, but I thought for what they were trying to do, I thought was pretty cool. Like the villain monologues, the how they were like kind of positioned with like backlighting, and they were cartoonishly evil, like
yeah,
Telly said,
Yeah.
and which
it
I
felt
completely.
it. Yeah,
And if that was
it
the goal, like it for me, in terms of the actors in it, I felt like that was the closest that they probably achieved to what they were trying to make for me. Where I was like, oh, I guess they kind of are doing the thing, and I not they weren't in it or doing enough to save the film performance wise at all. But I would say that they helped. They
Mhm.
helped this movie for me
Yeah, I
anyway.
think the villains were all about lighting and expensive suits.
Hmm.
And this is something that we've talked about in past episodes, is that you have to like why you have to show why your villain is evil or how evil they are, right? And through actions, not just sort of talking, because all they really do is just talk amongst each other
Yeah.
Hmm.
about how they're going to frame Tango and Cash, but you don't really demonstrate how evil and nefarious they are, right? Through
Yeah,
anything
but
that they
he
actually
had
do.
mice
But
that he
I mean, that's
literally
nothing.
put
Like
in
nothing
a
happens to them, right?
maze.
I thought he was gonna get like kill them or something, but all
Well,
he does is
so
put
that's
them in
interesting
the.
that you bring that up. So that was shout out to Jack Palance. I think Jack Palance is Jack Palance in everything that he does, and
Yeah.
he's like magnetic to look at. He's great on screen. He chews up all the scenery. I know that he later on, when asked about making this film, he said it was one of the worst experiences he had ever had making a movie. He had really hoped to do some scenes with Stallone, and in the script that he signed on to do, there was going to be some of that back and forth. But by the time he got to set, the script had been rewritten so many times, so many ways that he never even got to meet Stallone throughout the filming of the entire movie.
Oh wow.
Also, I just want to give. It was his idea to do the thing with the mice. I saw some interview where he tried to give some explanation as to like the symbolism, but I don't know. It was over my head. I just didn't get it. I
It's
was
totally over my head. I was like, "What's going on?" But that sounds like something an actor would suggest, and the director's like,
Yeah.
"Okay, I'm under
yeah,
your
you're on it.
mercy." Yeah.
Yeah,
All
yeah,
right, let's do it.
you
You're
got
a
it.
Hollywood legend. All right.
So Jack Palance was Yves Perret, who's like the main baddie, but also shout out to once again Mark Alimo, who we saw in Avenging Force, also from Star Trek, also from Total Recall,
Hmm.
and James Hong, the reconnection of Russell and Hong.
Yeah.
Um,
Congratulations on a second appearance
yeah,
on the
well,
Shoot
see,
Punch Kick
but
podcast.
so I'm almost gonna I'm gonna have to disagree a little bit on your characterization of, well, to some degree, of the villains being effective, because I found it to be completely the opposite. I just, it was too cartoony, it was too mustache twirly. I didn't get an understanding, again, to Telly's point about like how they're bad or why they're bad. They just well, oh, they the first time you see them, they're in a limo driving past the cocaine truck. Tango and Cash, Cash and Tango, Tango and Cash, and I don't know, him showing up at the jail for no reason, just to like gloat, and then at the end of the movie they're gonna, don't worry, we got this, we're gonna take our final stand. James Hong didn't even let a shot off before he
Oh.
got killed.
Yeah, the
Margalimo,
villains. Yeah, the
you know,
villains in
Well,
this movie reminding me of villains on like a children's cartoon,
yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah,
Where they're not dangerous. They're just there to be bad,
which I
but
think is
they're
Anthony's with
harmless.
Dash's
Yes.
point.
and which I agree. And also, but the thing is, like all those things that you said, and again, like, so right now, from what I was coming from, was the performances and like how they are somewhat depicted visually, at least. Like they showed up and did they do what their job was? And a lot of the
Mhm.
things that we're talking about are like, I think, writing, a
You're right.
little out
You're
of
right.
their
Absolutely.
control. And
Absolutely.
like the whole prison sequence is ridiculous how they come across. But like, given that, I thought that they did their thing. Like I would say that
I see
there
your
were
point.
probably moments that Sylvester Stallone could have done those lines better in, or be a little more charismatic in a way that was memorable. In which case, like, I didn't have that issue too much with the villains. Their motivations are like non-existent, things like that. But like with the lines, like, like you said, he chewed the scenes up that he was in with that like ridiculous monologue. So for them, performance wise, because Kurt
You're
Russell
right.
was Kurt Russell, right? Like there was he didn't have to dial it in. He just like kind of showed up for work, and it really worked with who he was. And that's similarly worked with the villains, but I didn't walk away like they were bad. I was just like, damn,
That's fair.
I wish
I
they gave
think
him some better stuff to work with.
it's funny. I think the most well developed villain in this entire movie was Robert Zadar.
Mhm.
Like you understood
Yes.
why he was mad. You understood what he was,
Get
why he was so.
motivation.
He
Yeah.
had motive, like, and he played it. He played it to great effect. I think he was exactly
And
who he was
he
supposed
had
to
an
be.
interesting look,
He
because
had the right
he
look.
had a very distinctive look as a baddie. But
I think,
uh,
hey, Telly, you actually brought up a really good point prior to the to us recording about some parallels between. So Robert Zadar is the maniac cop,
yeah.
and so do you want to just expound a little bit about
Yeah,
those
no, as I was
similarities?
rewatching this again, I was realizing the general plot of this movie is very similar to Maniac Cop, which came out a year before, because this is about like two super cops, and Maniac Cop is just one, but a super cop, great at his job, getting framed by criminal underworld in cahoots with people on the inside within the police precinct, getting sent to prison, effectively as a death sentence, and then somehow they escape, and then they go
Yeah,
on a rampage to avenge
yeah,
themselves. So yeah, it's a very similar plot, and done very different ways. So
Mhm.
yeah. And definitely, again, last, definitely but not least, the beautiful Terry Hatcher. I absolutely have always had a. It's funny. One thing that occurred to me is, between Lost Boys and this movie, I definitely have a type.
Yeah.
If you think about like Terry Hatcher, and
she's
Jamie
very
Gertz,
different than Diane Weiss. Diane Weiss, though.
that's true.
Okay,
Yeah, that's what I was
so
thinking.
But
I
no, it's
don't
a
see
different
it.
vibe.
Okay,
It's a
all
different
right.
vibe. Here's the thing. It's a completely different tab on my screen, on my browser. Um, but Terry Hatcher had a performance, I guess. Again, she did all right with what she had to work with. I think she was supposed to just kind of be the counterpart to Stallone, a humanized Stallone a little bit. And then also to be the damsel in distress at the end of the movie. Also played to pretty good comedic effect. Kurt Russell interactions with her to make
So I have
Stallone feel.
So I have a question about the Terry Hatcher thing because as I was watching it, and I just didn't want to, I didn't want to rewind it because I just want to finish watching it. But where in the first scene where she's introduced, it's I guess because later on it makes sense. It's purposely vague what the relationship between her and Stallone is, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I'm thinking that she's like his daughter, she's
Mhm.
his daughter or something. But then it's also like maybe they're like X's or something like that. I couldn't get a handle on it, but that was an interesting way to frame it,
Choice.
which is also very, European, non-American. So I was like, this director must be from
Well,
outside of the
actually,
U.S.
Wait till you get to
it's
page 90 in the
Yes.
review.
it's actually kind of funny you mentioned that because it goes back to the point of the pre-production mayhem that happened. So apparently, in the original version, it was a different actress, um, and it was a woman that looks how do I say it, like a little more Caucasian, and they were purposely trying to make it a question as to what their relation was. And the idea at the beginning was that by the end you find out that that's his sister, but it's more of like an adopted sister. And they were going to go into a
Oh,
backstory about that's not really his sister, but he basically has adopted her as a sister. And then they were like during the rewrites, were like, that's too much work. We don't have space for this. Let's grab somebody. And then they grabbed Terry Hatcher, who more closely resembles Stallone, face wise. And
I
so just said,
guess.
forget it. She's just, well, I mean, more than a blonde hair,
Yeah.
blue
I
eyed,
mean, that's the thing in movies, right? Where like the people who are siblings who are obviously not related, they don't. It's not apparent that they're related
and also,
whatsoever.
I think there was, now that I think about it too, there's some kind of blatant racist Italian slurs just thrown throughout this movie for like no apparent reason. Like, again, I didn't know if they were
There's
like trying to
always a
show he's,
reason. No, I'm just
yeah,
kidding.
I guess, cancel this man. But I don't know. Yeah, I thought it was odd. They just kept on referring to him with a phrase that I won't repeat, but um,
I mean, I think that's overall, that was just kind of the movie, right? Like, if someone was fat, they're like,
yeah, that's
hey,
true.
how many calories are you gonna eat? Like, it was just, and I think that's like an issue with this trying to be very witty script
Uh huh.
that almost all of it, and that's why I feel that it was very Spider-Man humor, because
Mm-hmm.
Peter Parker is just like a nerd, right? But when he's Spider-Man, he can only talk to the villains, and that's where he has all of his quips. Calls Doc Ock and he says some shit about his arms, and the Lizard some shit about his skin or whatever. This one was just,
Hanging fruit
even
jokes.
if they were on the same side, he's like, "Oh, you're, the lieutenant in my precinct. Hey, fatty!" Like, why? It was
Oh
just
yeah, yeah.
everyone talked to each other in
In that
this kind of like,
the crassest possible way, kind of right.
yeah,
Like
and
basic like low hanging fruit jokes.
yeah, and
Also,
it felt a little sitcom-y, like you always had, like the beef, and at a good level, you have like Al against Marcy, like that you always have those like kind of back and forths where everyone kind of
yeah,
gets
yeah,
over, and I think that's probably the tone that they were trying to go a little bit, or even like
yeah.
the Beverly Hills Cop
Well, I
where
think this would have been
Eddie
around that
Murphy's
time too.
always getting over on the whoever he's in exchange with, but yeah, the I think that was the tone of humor of being very insulting to each other,
Mhm.
which probably was like, okay, what do we say about Sylvester Stallone?
What can we come up with? Let me just look at you for a minute.
He's like, I already said
Hmm.
Rambo's a pussy. What what
Yeah.
what else can we
uh,
say?
I just also, that you mentioned that, I wanted to give a quick shout out to Roy Brocksmith, from
Yeah,
Total
also
Recall,
Total
uh,
Recall alum.
alum, yeah, as Federal Agent Davis, and also a shout out to almost a comically, I don't know if this is bad acting on purpose or not, but Brian James as the British kind of jerk face person for no reason. But I mean, again, I don't think it was great, but I think it was kind of one of those things where it was acted as written.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
You
think
know,
over the top henchmen or like like Robert Zadar was doing the same kind of thing, just like these like big baddies.
Hmm.
yeah, yeah. So shout out to them. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the script. I think we kind of already have, to some degree. I think um, the plot was breakneck to the point of absurdity. Again, I think within the first couple of minutes, I mentioned it before. I think it was the first 25 minutes. You've established each of them in their own scene. That first scene with Stallone was inspired by Super Cop, I believe, where he's like
First Police
shooting.
Story movie.
Oh, is it a police story? Well, isn't
Yeah.
is that not the same thing?
No, Super Cop is Police Story 3.
Oh, gotcha. Okay,
So the first police
sorry.
story is where Jackie Chan is standing in front of the double decker bus and it screeches to the halt, and then the guys at the top deck are flying out the
Oh,
window and
but it
land
wasn't the
on the
shooting thing.
ground.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
also, so first of all, that scene I just want to say is completely ridiculous. I don't know where were they trying to get away from? They had a helicopter chasing them, and they're in a fucking fuel tanker. So like, how is this a chase? At a certain point, you're in the desert down a long highway that's straight. You're not gonna lose them. So that didn't really make kind of any sense to me whatsoever. Um, so you get that scene. Then you get Kurt Russell with the ridiculous.
Hold on, real quick
Uh,
for that
yeah.
scene, and then when they do fly in, he says, glad you could drop in, and you have the cue of what you're about to sit through for the next hour and 40 minutes
Oh yeah, yeah.
from
That first
that
joke set the
moment.
Yeah.
tone. Yeah,
Yeah,
and then
and it
Yeah.
was
also,
just like he
Well,
said,
that
like,
first scene is where, like, at the end of that first scene with Stallone after he's introduced. That's like when it started to lose me because I was like, it was all the tropey stuff, like okay, the rogue cop doing things his way, and then the lieutenant or the supervisor coming in and like, what are you doing? Blah blah blah, and
yeah,
obviously he's like, we've seen this a million times, right, in these types of movies. And I was like, okay, are you gonna subvert these expectations? Because right now this is very sort of run of the mill stuff. And I realized, okay, this is the movie, and it's not
yeah,
ironic, and it doesn't understand what it is. But yeah, that's when I was like, okay, this is gonna be a long,
right out
it's
the
gonna be
gate.
a long 100 minutes. Yeah.
yeah. And then so again, back to the point I was making. So you get an establishment of who Stallone is in that ridiculous scene. Also, first he's trying to shoot. I think he was trying to kill Robert Dizdar because he was like shooting at the windshield, and then at the last minute
Mhm.
he decides to shoot at the wheels,
No, I
and
think
then
so. My takeaway was he knew that they were behind some sort of bulletproof glass because he changes his bullets.
tactic.
Yeah, no,
Oh
so
yeah, he
he
had the thing
changes
out, and
the
then
he
he
empties
does change
the
his bullets.
yeah. So I think that was like with some intent to to get him out, but again, given the circumstance, given everything that's going on, completely unnecessary and
And also
ridiculous.
it felt like that slowdown. Maybe this is better left for stunts and stuff, but so like that slowdown of that tanker wouldn't have resulted in them flying out in front of the windshield like it did. Like it kind of slowly came to a stop, and then when it stopped, they flew out. But it was
Yeah,
like,
yeah. It
I don't know,
wasn't
put a
like
seatbelt
abrupt.
on, or
Yeah.
Yeah.
and so then 2 minutes
It
later we get the Kurt Russell intro, which is cool. The newspaper, the ridiculous gun in the boot thing, pretty cool chase. Again, Russell is great in that. And then there's the scene where they get framed, and within again 20 minutes of the film, we've been introduced to both the main players, the baddie. They've set the stage where they've met. They've gone and gotten framed, and now we're doing this whole trial
Well,
thing.
also
Right?
Yeah.
with well as breakneck and nonsensical as those scenes are, even within the scenes are a insane amount of choices to just one thing. So, for example, this parking lot chase scene with Kurt Russell, he gets in the car, there's like a whole little homeless moment, right? Like the
Yeah, yeah.
lady's
And he
pushing
pushes
the
the thing in
cart.
front of.
So then, as they're
Mhm.
driving, he passes by another car where apparently people are having sex in the back seat of the
Yeah,
car.
yeah.
So, mind you, this is
Right.
one parking lot structure where
Yeah.
there's the homeless, there's
And the sex.
people, and then the scene progresses, and there's another part where apparently the parking lot's under construction because there's like fluorescent
Window, the
lights hung
glass.
up, there's construction people diving out of the way. So again, like just within this like one location, you can
So many
tell they
things.
were just like, nothing is on the cutting room floor at this point. There is
Yeah.
nothing that, like, it seemed like a bunch of people had ideas of what could be in this scene, and they were just like, yes. Like it was
That was
perfect.
the biggest, that was the most frustrating thing for me in the film, is that I mentioned this earlier. They set the stage, and a very big stage, for like a fun and interesting action sequence that doesn't deliver. So
Mhm.
like in that garage, in that parking lot, there could be a lot of interesting, all the cars there, and things like that. And then also in the prison escape scene, the rain coming down, all the beautiful angles and everything, and all they're doing is basically just zip lining across, nothing interesting. And also the big finale, where it looks like a monster truck rally. It just lets you down, because it doesn't really do anything with all that.
Yeah,
And
I
they
think
also kind of did that in the parking lot. Like, that was a big demolition derby as well of parked cars, because it gets to a point where it's just this car that Kurt Russell's in crashing into a bunch of other cars. And, it definitely sets up a pace that it doesn't keep up with. I mean, it's still out of control. Even again, like, everything that we're mentioning about these screens, you can say about the prison as well. There are so many
Mhm.
different story beats and things going on, and
Yeah.
ideas and characters who were introduced and disappeared, and it was just so much
Yeah,
going
it's
on.
kind of making stuff up as it goes along, and it just as a script, it just felt like a first draft, where it
Yeah.
just
yeah, I
felt very
think
unpolished. But I could
I,
see also at the same time, to give the screenwriter credit, that on the page the lines might have been funny, on the page,
Mhm.
like the quips coming back and forth, but not being delivered by, like Stallone. But it could have been amusing looking on the page.
Mhm.
yeah, I think there's a lot of that. Again, when I was looking at the jailhouse break scene, again, you're right, absolutely. First of all, they go into this jail, and there's fires burning in the corners, shit falling from the rafters. Right, it didn't. This is when you're like, all right, this is parody. It's almost like a cartoon or a comic book. And then and then all of a sudden, somehow they're all in some, I don't know if it's the basement or if it is the vent system or something, where 70, 80 prisoners all come together, right? And there's steam everywhere, and they all just congregate, and they're having a party basically. And they have access to big vats of water and electric cable, which, and then all of a sudden, freeze, and then somehow it gets raided, but everybody just kind of scatters like cockroaches and manages to get away. But like, if
Yeah,
they manage to get away, then how is it a prison where anybody's being held? Then his whole escape sequence kind of didn't make a lot of sense too, where he's on his work duty is by himself in the middle of the night in the pouring rain, and they wouldn't give him a jacket. He's in the fucking wife beater to break apart a piece of wall. That part of wall that he broke away happened to be right in the middle of some pipes, right, that he could crawl through. Where was this big fan blowing air to? Right, the
yeah.
whole complex is closed, right? So that big fan was completely, like, you don't understand. And why does it slide down some kind of
Yeah,
vent to get
that's
to the
that
fan
whole
with
prison
water
sequence
sliding?
just didn't make any sense, because even when they're
Then
in the wherever they're in the basement, wherever, whatever it is, and then when they're being electrocuted, like, how does, number one, how does that not kill them? But number two, like,
yeah,
they don't go it all the way, because I was expecting them to rotoscope some, like electricity, like
like, yeah,
Highlander
yeah,
shit going on with them. Because if you're gonna be ridiculous, just be
Yeah,
go
you
for
ridiculous,
it.
gotta do
right?
it. Yeah, you gotta lean in.
And
Yeah,
then
yeah,
when Jack Palance comes out and he's like in the shadows, why is he like in the shadows? We already seen him. It's
Yeah,
no,
we know who
yeah,
like,
he
yeah.
is.
and like, if Stallone's character has never seen him before, what difference does it make? So I wonder. I wasn't watching closely enough, but if that was maybe a body double, and Jack Palance was not available that day for whatever reason. But
Maybe.
that was a bizarre choice.
No, and
And
then
then the whole thing with the fans, that was a great example of setup and no payoff, because I thought like Robert Zadar
somebody was gonna catch one.
was gonna get pureed in the fan, but
Yeah, yeah.
that
No,
never happens.
But
and then
also, can we just mention how they get to the basement? They don't bring him. They don't bring Tango and Cash down through the stairs. They wrap them up in sacks
and put
and
them in the
toss them
chutes.
down a laundry chute
Laundry
for
chute.
them
Yeah.
to show up in this basement. And then you're like, oh, okay, I guess,
It's a
like,
laundry
maybe
room
you can't get around freely, which they completely prove wrong by the
because there's 80
amount of
people in there.
henchmen who just show up.
Yeah.
Uh, Yeah,
And at the end of the whole escape, it boils down to them just having to crawl on top of some crane that goes over the wall for
yeah.
some reason, which
Mhm.
seems completely illogical for a prison, right? Like escape here, right? And then the lightning thing was interesting. I thought it was cool how Zadar died. That was probably like the coolest, kind of death portion of it. The way he died was in the light in like the I don't know if it's a reactor or what it is, the
Mhm.
electrical system. Um, I'm surprised no one made a joke. Or somebody said anything like, "Oh, shocking!" Right? I was ready for Stallone to say "shocking" right there, right then and there. And then I always find it funny the cliche of doing the like zip line thing because like that only works. I've done zip lining at camp. I was like a camp counselor, or something like. There's got to be a certain angle, and you have to be a certain way, or else you'll just be there stuck,
Yeah.
sitting there, just kind of like. And of course, that doesn't happen. So I mean, again, even just I think I saw an interesting breakdown on YouTube once when so they were talking about something in Star Trek First Contact where they go through these Jeffries tubes and they enter into a room and the room has basically access to space, right? Like it's like you can see out into space from the ship, but the only access into it is Jeffrey's tubes here and here. And somebody was like, "What is the purpose of this room? The
Oh,
only way to
yeah.
get to it is
Mhm.
from tubes on either side of this room. You can't use it for storage unless you're coming in from the outside. It doesn't make sense." And after having heard that, now I think I'm doomed to watch movies like this and be like, "What the fuck is the purpose of this vent room? Where is it venting into? Why does it have an angle, right?" And so it just didn't make a whole lot of sense. So I don't know, script wise, I think you're exactly right. I feel like they were like, all right, who's got a bunch of ideas? Throw it in the bag, shake up the bag, and then just empty the whole bag out. And like, it doesn't matter why we shake up the bag anyway. We're just gonna
Mhm.
throw everything. We're just gonna
And
throw everything in it anyway. In a quarry, like, why does this guy live in a quarry? Why does his quarry have a self destruct?
the
Right,
problem
like my
that
house.
I
I
think
haven't. Yeah.
that all of these things have too is like there is there are times where I was like, this doesn't make any fucking sense. But then I'm like, but they did set it up, right? Like there's some stuff where there was a part in the movie where I was like, when they meet the inventor, and I'm like, this is fucking dumb. There's no setup at all. But then I was like, oh yeah, he did shoot a bullet out of his
From
boot
his
an
boot.
hour ago. So I'm like,
But
maybe
I
they did
completely
set it up.
forgot about that until you guys brought that up. So it
And I
just
feel like
doesn't
that
like.
with this happened throughout the movie. So when you guys were mentioning his prison detail, that leads up to that ridiculous ass fan, right? Like his job like was partially leading to his eventual escape. With Terry Hatcher showing up, I'm like, oh wait, where is this plot coming from? And I'm like, oh yeah, that one scene earlier
Earlier.
with Sylvester Stallone. And like this probably felt like a script that did work on paper, but then when you watch it, you're like, what the fuck is going
Yeah.
on in these moments? When it got to the quarry, it just seemed like here's a closed area where we can do some stuff and have space to do it. It
Oh,
made no sense to me.
he's in his house quarry area. He's got all ATVs with rocket launchers on them.
Well,
Like, oh,
that came
this
from the inventor, right? I thought that came from
Yeah, no, the
from
van because
Pierce.
they had that tricked out like
no, no.
RV.
If you look, they had ATVs shooting
Oh,
rockets, fucking. I guess to try to hit Tango and Cash in the RV. They miss and hit the guys that are chasing Tango and Cash.
oh,
But if
okay.
you look, there's actually a shot, and I circled it
Mhm.
where it's like four ATVs with rocket launchers on
Yeah.
their roofs, just randomly shooting off rockets because you never know when you might need some fucking
Mhm.
rockets.
Yeah,
Um,
it is LA.
so yeah, that whole quarry thing just didn't also make any sense to me at all. Where
Well,
like
it just
he
felt
just
lazy because you just have this big open
monster
space where
trucks.
things could just explode. It would have been great if Stallone and Russell took that RV and stormed like a skyscraper with it, right? Go right into the lobby of a building. But they just go into this open area, and I think like people
Yeah, I
that watch
think
action movies,
I,
they're primed to expect certain things, and I think this sort of went for the obvious stuff, but didn't really add enough of a new coat of paint to make it interesting.
Yeah, I also found it kind of funny too that he would tell Cash to go out to find his sister. Like, dude, you were on the run. We've got killers chasing after us. But if you need help, go find my sister and bring that danger to my sister.
Mhm.
You know, like it didn't. It didn't. Also, I want to say too. I mean, again, I in my adolescence, I was very happy to see that there was going to be a scene with Terry Hatcher dancing. Um, dancing. In my head, that scene was way more intricate than it was actually in reality. Like, I don't know, in my head, I thought it was more like, you know, like Salma Hayek in Dust Till Dawn,
Mhm.
Hmm.
where it was this whole like elaborate kind of, you know, sexy thing. And I guess in my head, maybe I thought she was a stripper, but she's not really. She's like an actual, you know, she's like a
Yeah, she
dancer.
was like Sheila E. I don't know. Yeah, and
Yeah,
first
yeah,
playing drums, and I was like, "What? I don't know what this is, but whatever."
yeah, yeah. Can we also talk about Kurt Russell in drag?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Beautiful.
it's like I don't know. Again, it's like, what's the point of all this? You know?
Like, no one will know.
No reason for any of that. He could have just went to the, to, hey, go to my house, apparently, because he was
Mhm.
paying for it, and my sister will be there, as opposed to this club where the cops show up and she has to do like a distraction, and
Yeah,
they lock eyes for a second, and then she helps him get away, and
yeah.
it is just completely unnecessary.
Yeah, man. All right. So the script, as we can say, as I think is evidenced by our conversation, was all over the place and weird. And then that kind of also just dovetails into the direction. Again, clearly this is a movie. It's obvious that this was helmed by more than one director, more than one set of editors, one more than one set of copies. Um, so maybe let's move a little bit more, instead of thinking about the direction, but more towards like the set and the cinematography. To your point, I don't know if you noticed this, but I did read that the original cinematographer was fired and replaced with somebody else mid. Um, but to your point, I think if we had to find some pluses, some of those shots, some of the way things were framed, again, as the jailhouse was completely ridiculous, having all that fire and stuff going around, but it looked cool.
Well, I will say the
Yeah.
cinematographer that they got was Donald E. Thorin, who is known for Michael Mann's Thief, which is fucking amazing.
Uh-huh.
The Prince classic Purple Rain,
Oh
which
wow.
is
Okay.
amazingly shot,
Yeah, it's a
and
music video. You
yeah,
and Dash, you and me.
you already know how we feel about Purple Rain. This
All right,
is a
Prince. Take it
pedigree,
easy,
a
Prince.
top of the line director of photography. And that's what I meant with there was one shot very early in it where the villains are meeting, and it's like James Hong in the middle, you had the other guys like at the very far end. It was a very wide shot, and it was just a great looking shot. There was another moment later on where it's before the truck busts into the where they do, like, I guess, the arms dealing, and you see like the light shining through on through this like warehouse windows, and they cast these like beams of light and stuff. And this was the cinematography, the lighting was great on this movie. I thought it looked really good. There was a couple of moments with the set, even that part where I was talking about in the parking lot where the car was going through, where they had the fluorescent lights kind of just like hanging around. Looked cool. I mean, it made no sense given any of the circumstance. And that whole prison scene, with as cartoonish as the villains were, the presentation of that, like what was going on, I hated. Like I thought it was dumb, like the James Bond-esque booby traps that they're like, was not a fan of that. But the presentation of these villains disappearing into the smoke and coming out, like
Yeah, it looked great.
he took that script and was like,
I'm a
that stuff
cinematographer
will
the shit out of
happen,
this
but I'll
thing.
make it
Yeah.
look dope.
No,
And
it
Yeah,
was
I
a
thought,
exactly.
very slick looking film, without a
yeah.
doubt. Yeah.
The
It's
quarry
just like,
sequence looked really great too. I don't know, for some
mhm.
reason I was getting John Carpenter vibes. I'm
Okay.
not really sure why, but
Mm.
the cinematography, even though there was really nothing happening in that scene at the quarry, they were just driving around in circles, and
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
it looked cool, right? Again, the steam rising, the quarry
Yeah.
itself. Um, yeah, any standouts for you, Telly? set wise, shot wise, like
Cinematography, yeah, I mentioned, yeah, it's a very nice looking film. The sequences are shot nice, although again, the action itself is what
was
really
lacking.
fails the film because it's
Um,
like, yeah, it's shot beautifully, but there's not enough interesting things happening
all
Mhm.
right,
within
so
the context of the movie.
I did
uh,
find the interesting choice of the newspapers. Like some of it felt very like noirish of like, and again, I like that it was felt like a comedy, like a parody of just like this story being told about these cops in the headlines of the
to be clear,
paper.
you're talking about during the trial phase, right? The
All of it.
newspaper
No, like
headlines.
even
Well,
at
the
the beginning,
beginning,
where
Oh
from
yeah,
the
that's right.
beginning, the trial, the end of like, that's how you find out that they're
That
cleared. You get some
they got
like
cleared.
plot
That's true.
points through these like, through the papers. And I
You know
thought
what
that
else
was
is
a
funny
callback.
too? They got 18 months for killing somebody in a drug deal.
Crazy. Yeah. Yeah. Like
Which
with audio evidence of them being
of them having
completely
yeah,
done
corrupt.
this is
it.
LA, this is pre-Rodney King, so
Yeah, that
Yeah,
seems
that was crazy.
very light on the sentencing.
Okay, more towards the direction. I feel like the shower scene was kind of gratuitous. I definitely didn't need to see all that man ass. It caught me off guard. I actually like I was eating while I was watching this, and I did like a semi spit take. Oh shit! And I wasn't expecting that. And again, that I mean, there's nothing wrong with gratuitousness. I just they could have had that scene happen while they were in the truck on the way over, right? Like in while they're getting moved. To have it happen with them just so that they could make dick jokes.
well, man ass is a inherently funny kind of thing, and
Yeah.
like they could have done something funny with that, where it's like almost like a shock shot, but it's just there,
I also don't see
um,
this whole thing
and
of like
that's
just
probably
men in
why I was
showers
like
talking.
that's when I was sensing the European leanings of the director because it just felt like okay, there's a lot of room for shock value in the prison scene, especially like when they're taking a shower together and all that and just being in prison, right? And they didn't go there, and that could have been not that that would have been sort of like original comedy, but I thought they were gonna play around with that a little bit, especially with the roommate with the cellmates that they had.
Do you think the director thought this was funny? Like when they were
Yes.
looking at dailies, do you think that they were chuckling looking at the dailies?
Um.
No.
Well, the
And
director got fired, so I think he was doing. I
Well, he
don't.
got fired
I
for
think it was
not
a
wanting
very
to make it
different.
funny.
It was different sensibility, right? But I obviously like the way. But I've heard stories about just like Stallone, like ghost directing movies, especially like in the '80s, like with Cobra and things like that. So I wonder, the dynamic between Stallone and the original director, or maybe there was a clash there in terms of how the character was being portrayed, and maybe Stallone thought he was being funny, and
Hmm.
director like this is not working, and Stallone's like, no, I know better than you do.
Yeah.
So who knows? But yeah, but obviously the direction, this was like the wrong director for this material. And I
For all
thought
of them.
originally that this was like a Joel Silver sort of like, Lethal Weapon, the team behind Lethal Weapon, and it wasn't at all. This is John Peters who did Batman, and he was going to do the Nicolas Cage Superman. And if you ever saw the documentary, he's like quite a character that doesn't really have the best judgment either in terms of what works for these types of movies. So
So that guy did Batman and this the same year, right? Because I think Batman was 81.
yeah,
mhm.
All right. So let's kind of move it along. We're running a little we're running a little long already, but just quickly let's talk about some of the stunts, the special effects. Again, the Stallone stopping the truck thing was kind of interesting. I can't believe he shot directly. I don't know how the physics works, but I don't know if I'd feel comfortable just shooting a gasoline tanker right in the back.
No, well,
With the
he knew.
assumption,
I mean, that was the thing, right? He knew it was cocaine,
yes.
and
yeah,
where
but
no
he
one
did
else.
it.
What was that?
I mean, I don't think he did. I mean, he did, but that's like a risk. Because what if, like, he until he actually got in there, he didn't really know.
I
I don't
mean,
know. I
Right.
just
supposedly
Well,
that was
he's such
he
a
was
great cop, and he does
he
things
was a
his
step
way.
ahead of
Yes.
the highway patrol.
the Russell chase sequence we've already covered is ridiculous and kind of weird. Although one shot I thought was pretty cool was when he crashed into one car to have that car crash into the bad guy. I thought that was an interesting Nah, the yeah, you're right. I mean, again, we're talking about the stunts. The stunts weren't that great. They try to do this interesting. They try to have like a fight scene towards the end where Stallone is fighting that dude who's just kicking through glass for no
Yeah.
reason.
Mhm.
That wasn't really well kind of done. Even the scene where they're inside the laundry in the prison, where there's a couple of shots where they were gonna. That was actually that scene. I actually thought wasn't as terrible, or at least the banter before the electricity. Just like don't panic. He's come on, kill me, but don't let him do
Yeah.
it. You know what I'm saying? I thought that was like all right, but overall, I would say I'm gonna go have to go with the nah dog on some of these on the choreography and like the stunts.
Hmm.
It was okay and some cool ideas, but execution, I think it was poor. Is that a fair assessment for you, Dash? To
Yeah,
say
and
that
I
you feel the
think
same?
given the where they were to be able to do something like going back to Maniac Cop, that was a crazy ass prison sequence. Like this is you can do certain stuff without introduce that like they went into that scene. And please check out our Maniac Cop 2 episode if you're looking for context. But in this, they went in with like, okay, we're gonna try and do a couple of things. We have like a couple of like really big stunt moments that we want to like build up to. In that movie, people were pushed through the side of a wall onto a bus while on fire, and everything in that sequence led up to it. How they got there, this chase, they're going up the stairs, you're like, how are they going to get out? And it leads to this thing. In this movie, it seemed like, if you take the prison sequence as a whole, things didn't really lead to each other. So everything felt like it worked very independently. They had access to so many extras, to like have, all those people that showed up. They didn't really interact with any of them. It became just these like two moments of them tied up or escaping, and not from them, because they get into the walls, and they're really only running away from one guy. Then when they're on the roof, they're only fighting one guy, and then they're out. So it was a lot of almost like reverse Chekhov's gun, where you're showing me a bunch of stuff and then doing almost nothing with it. And what you did do with it was like not that interesting. I mean, the zip line, we're getting a little bit into like Home Alone territory
Yeah.
of escaping prison on your belt through an electric line was especially like hearing that the director wanted this to be more serious. I'm wondering like how any of that was possible with just given the amount of over the top elements of this movie. Like I don't see a world where this could have had a coherent vision, as opposed to, because too much would have had to come out in order to get to this like serious. There wasn't like a serious core to achieve. So I'm wondering what that looked like. But sorry, long answer, but yeah, like that was a fair assessment.
Telly, same.
Yeah, nothing memorable. Again, if this fails the YouTube clip test, right? Am I ever gonna like try to look for a clip from this film and show it to anybody? And there's none of those standout moments in this movie, whether action or non-action. Um, the funny thing about rewatching some of these 80s movies now on HD is you see the stuntmen and women are very obvious. So there's like one scene in the movie where there's an explosion and it throws Stallone backwards and he kind of flips
The
towards the
house.
camera and it's like it
Yep,
turns to another
in
person.
the
Looks
house.
nothing like Stallone. So that was the moment I did rewind because I'm like, wait, is there another person in that house? No, it's Stallone. It's just Stallone stuntman.
Oh my
Um,
god,
but
there's not
yeah, I
enough
mean, it
iron in
tries
that
to do a
diet.
lot of things, and I just wonder too if we've just been overstimulated by Marvel movies, and just because we've seen things, movies these days are so much more fast paced, and things from the 80s now just feel so quaint. But there's, like that scene at the end with just the monster trucks and stuff, and I know that was popular back in the day, and I wonder if that was just sort of pandering to that audience. But there's nothing inherently interesting or exciting about what's going on other than just a chase with some big explosions, but nothing really going on. So, yeah, and I just felt like that was the whole thing with the movie. Even the finale with the final standoff, just the movie just ends, with Jack Palance. There's not even much of a build up. It's just, it's like a bad video game when you come to the end and you just kill kill the main boss, and game's over. There's not even like a
Yeah.
coda or anything.
Yeah, but the thing is, normally in a video game, the main boss has an extra long health bar, multiple phases. It's not just a
Right.
regular random fucking NPC
Yeah.
that you could just kill with one shot. Like that was, and then she kept, also they just. I mean, I guess it makes sense that they would kidnap Terry Hatcher, but the fact that they didn't like allude to it happening, I guess I'm just used to like you'd at least see her leaving somewhere, and the fucking British dude is like behind her to give you the impression she's been kidnapped. But I mean, she was really just there to be damsel in distress, and then she was had the knife to her throat, and then I guess the dude threw her to the ground so they could have their fight scene. And I guess Jack Palance then came and picked her up, and then she's got a gun in her head, right? And
Yeah.
then they shoot him, and she gets knocked out, and she's got to be away. It didn't make a whole lot of, yeah.
I mean,
It's
that's a
Yeah, I
running
mean that would have
theme
been a
for
great
the
moment
entire
to
movie.
reintroduce Kurt Russell's boot
he
gun,
did, he did.
right? He did.
That's what he shot him. He did. That's what he
Oh,
shot him with.
really? Okay, I
That's
don't
what he shot
remember
him with.
any.
Yeah,
See, I can't
he shot
remember.
him with
I
the
watched
boot
it
gun.
last night. I can't remember shit. Okay,
Yeah, he shot him with the boot gun at the end. That was
okay.
it.
No, but
All
didn't
right.
Stallone have a gun in his like?
He had
Okay, I don't
Stallone
know.
had a gun, and
Okay,
Russell shot him with the boot gun, and then they had
right.
that whole like, oh, how did you know it was the ring? Oh, it was the
Okay.
Which
monogram.
was
Like,
crazy
all
too. There
right,
was like a house of mirrors in this quarry.
well,
Yeah, and they
just
don't do
for no
anything with
reason.
that. And they also don't see that's another thing. They set that whole thing up and you're expecting like because I'm thinking I know originally it was from Lady from Shanghai, the Orson Welles movie, but obviously Enter the Dragon made that famous.
Yeah,
And I'm expecting a chase through that and nothing. It's just
just
okay, we're
shot,
just
single
gonna shoot
shot.
him. That's
Yeah.
it.
Which
Yeah.
one's the real whatever?
All right, we can talk quickly. I think you mentioned it a little bit earlier, Dash, about the music. It's funny. I did not realize that it was the same composer as Beverly Hills Cop, but in my run of show notes, I wrote synthwave trying to sound like Beverly Hills Cop.
What?
Uh,
He's like
so
nailed it.
so what I have written down here is that Harold Faltermeyer and Gary Chang did compose the music. Chang provided additional music near the end of the movie because Faltermeyer could not return to rescore the final reel of the film. So again, another one of those situations where there was somebody who had an idea for the entirety of this movie and how it was going to be sound and scored, but then because of so many rewrites, so many reshoots, they had to bring somebody else in to kind of do it, and the result is it's a little bit disjointed. One highlight I want to shout out was in the Terry Hatcher dance sequence, "Don't Go" by Yazoo is a song that just instantly gave me flashbacks to the pizzeria on Bay Parkway,
Oh my
in
god.
1990, right, just hanging out in front like in the
That song was
summertime.
everywhere. Yeah.
It was popular that year, and so I definitely it was a nice little bit of nostalgia for me. I don't know, guys. Any thoughts, comments, or anything you want to talk about with the music?
I hated it. I'm
Me
gonna
too. I
just
didn't like
say
it.
like
I didn't
right
like it.
right out of the jump, I'm trying to figure out what this movie is. And usually you can tell with the music track of a movie that'll really like hit you over the hey, we
This is
are, such
this.
and such. And it was so just not compatible with some of the things that the visuals were trying to do and the stories were trying to do. And when you look at the filmography of the composer, you're talking about Beverly Hills Cop, Fletch, Top Gun, which I
Nice.
think Top Gun is its
Yeah.
own thing, The Running Man, but you have Tango and Cash, Cuffs. There's a lot of
Christian
like
Slater.
the comedy cop, lighthearted, especially when you look at like your Fletch and Beverly Hills Cop, and that tone in these moments of this like fusion-esque music just did not work for me at
Mm-hmm.
all with it,
Same.
and it did not help the movie at all. I thought.
Telly.
I didn't hate the music. I thought, yeah, the Yazoo song sticks out in my head. But nothing special. The final song, by it turns out it was by Bad English. It reminded me of those songs that play at the over the. It felt like an end credits song because and as I was hearing it, it just reminded me of being a kid back in the day, walking out of a theater and just some kind of generic rock song playing over the end credits. Um, Yeah, and that's faint praise. But yeah, nothing that really kind of stood out or memorable. I'm not going to be looking for the soundtrack or anything like that.
Yeah, not at all. So with that, we can turn to the reactions, critical reaction from the time and currently. So the film has a score of 31 on Rotten Tomatoes, based on 48 reviews, and is an average rating of 4.4 out of 10. Critical response consensus says brutally violent, punishingly dull. This cookie cutter buddy cop thriller isn't even fun enough to reach so bad it's good status. On Metacritic, the film has a weighted average score of 41 out of 100, indicating mixed or average reviews. The New York Times criticized the plot, the screenplay, and the acting. Michael Wilmington of the Los Angeles Times called it a waste of talent and energy on all levels, criticizing the film as both illogical and predictable. Dave Kerr of the Chicago Tribune wrote that one interpretation of the film is a crafty foreigner's sly parody of the current state of American culture. To your
Mm.
point, Telly.
Mm.
But strangely, audiences polled by CinemaScore gave the film an average grade of B plus on an A plus to F scale.
Wow.
So I'm wondering if this is one of those situations where it's like critically bashed, but a viewer darling, which I can't, because again, we were the target demographic at the time, and maybe Anthony hadn't seen it, and maybe you at this point you were maybe too young to be cognizant of like this being a thing. But I remember this movie very clearly, and just remember not I didn't think badly or goodly about it. It was just I saw it and it was a movie that I had seen, but I didn't really
Yeah. Well,
until Terry Hatcher.
that's the interesting thing about these types of movies where it came out, it was a big hit, right?
It did. It made a lot of money. Wait, what's the numbers? What's the
And
numbers?
maybe, and looking back, it doesn't, I think I see people on YouTube talking about this and remembering it pretty fondly, but I wonder, one of the reasons is that at the time when you were going to see this, right, this was like Stallone at his height.
Height.
And then this is a very bombastic, loud movie. Kurt Russell also, at his height. So, I think a lot of that also clouds some judgment for like these types of popcorn movies.
Rose tinted
Uh,
glasses.
yeah, exactly.
To my buddy, to the point too, my buddy Jamie, who asked for this, he said, he mentioned it as a movie he loved. I suspect I got to go back and ask him, but I suspect he probably loved this movie, but hasn't seen it in decades.
Yeah.
I think it's probably one of those things where it's like if he were to watch it now, he'd be like, yeah, this is. And again, to your point, as far as budget wise, this was a $54 million budget and made 120 million. So it did really really well in the box office at the
Yeah.
time.
And I mean, like, if you're looking at the big heavy hitters of the action space of, the Bruce Willis, Arnold, Sylvester Stallone trilogy, this at that time probably was, I mean, you have like Twins, which was, I guess, Arnold's first like big dabbling into comedy. If this was the comedy, and if you found this funny, I bet this was like a new type of action star for 1989 of not seeing, Bruce Willis was very like, not only serious, he did some comedies at the time, but if this being within that like Lethal Weapon, which I think Lethal Weapon 2 came out this same year, I think that there was a kind of because people talk about this movie with buddy cops, like they're not talking about like Bad Boys as like one of the like mentioning of 3 buddy cop movies. Like Tango and Cash has a lot of street cred when it comes to the buddy cop space, and I think that tells me that the things that didn't work for me worked for people. Like this odd pairing of this rich cop and this blue collar other cop, I like it didn't work for me, but I'm I don't know, like in 1989 maybe it did. With Sylvester Stallone at the peak, there's some like Arnold movies that I love where in hindsight I'm like, all right, maybe that wasn't the best one, but riding on that like wave of momentum was probably
Yeah.
rated a little bit higher. So I could see that being the case with this. And also just being within that, like, imagine if you saw Lethal Weapon 1, Lethal Weapon 2, and you're like, man, I want more of that. And you come in with a Kurt Russell who's, definitely a much more of a name than he was when we were talking about Big Trouble in Little China. And you have, 2 of these
Hmm.
forces together just bouncing back off of each other. I could see it being like a really, positive experience, but in the year of 2024, it didn't resonate with myself.
It's funny also too. Just there was discussions apparently at some point about 5 years later of possibly doing a sequel. And the reason that didn't happen was because Kurt Russell said he didn't want to do it, and his answer was that he was past his. He said they were both past their prime to be doing action movies. But then the very next year he did Soldier.
No,
So that sounds like an excuse. Like, I don't want to hurt your feelings, but that movie sucked. I didn't want to be in it,
Yeah,
so I'm just gonna find an excuse to not make it. And the excuse
yeah. I
I'm giving
know.
is
I
I'm
know
too old to do
Stallone's.
action movies.
I know Stallone's brought that up like a couple recently too. That some kind of like a sequel, and I can't even imagine why would you do a sequel? There's no more. There's no more story there. Um, but but Stallone's been doing that for the last like 10 years, teasing like sequels to like every movie he's ever done, like
hmm
Cliffhanger and whatever.
Um, yeah, okay, so kind of, kind of tough to think of in this madness. Favorite scenes, favorite things, from it. I think that there's if I had to pick something, I think my favorite scene in this was the scene where Kurt Russell meets his jail cellmate and goes to use the bathroom. That was one of the maybe only times in the movie where I legitimately laughed. Where they do the whole he stands up. There's one thing
Yeah,
I gotta
yeah,
be clear about. This is your toilet.
yeah.
So that was a joke that actually landed for me, and so I'm gonna pick that as my favorite scene slash part of this film. Dash, do you wanna?
Mine was a parking lot scene. I thought that
Okay.
as much was going on with it, and again, like it points to an example of just overkill with too many ideas in a space. I thought that it because it was so early in the movie. Um, really showed a lot of promise. I would say at this point in the movie, I was really on board with Tango and Cash and wanting it to be a really great, fun movie because of those things that I pointed out. Like, there's a homeless person. There's also like people having sex in the car. There's construction site. Starts off at his house. There's the gun in the boot. Like they throw a lot at you, and there's a time where that could have explained itself and been plausible and just enjoyable. But I like that where it was in the movie. I thought it was like a fun introduction to a character that we just saw Sylvester Stallone's character, and this was a big departure, right? Like he was addressing it way differently, and I thought that played up the odd couple pairing of like, oh, okay, this guy's not going to do what this first guy did, and which he didn't, and I thought it was pretty cool. And then also in that scene, man, we had what's his name? I think also from Big Trouble in Little China. I'm gonna let's see, pull it up. Philip Tan as the gunman who acted like he didn't speak English. He's an OG in a bunch of movies. Where now, of course, I won't be able to think of anything off the top of my head. But yeah, I thought that was a solid scene.
That Stallone fight scene at the end with the martial arts suit, for like a brief second, I thought we were gonna see Al Leong.
Yeah, me
Like
too.
when he goes to take the guns, I was like, oh shit, is that Al Leong? I'm always on the lookout for him.
Always. But yeah, that guy,
To-
he's in Batman as Goon, Tango and Cash, Martial Law,
oh wow, okay,
Showdown in Little Tokyo, Surf Ninjas. I mean, we're talking about your A
yeah,
list
Goon.
star. So yeah, that was a solid
He's a
introduction.
luminary in the goon in the field of goons.
100%.
Telly, what do you
Yeah.
wanna pick as your favorite
Well,
part of
I'm
the
glad
movie?
you didn't start with me because I would have to. I would be struggling to think about a scene
Told you it was
because
gonna be
obviously I have a hard
a
time
tough choice.
remembering the movie. But I'm with you, Carlos. I think that would be my favorite scene is the Kurt Russell scene in the prison cell. Yeah, he shines. He's always funny. His charisma jumps off the screen, and I'm just a sucker for jokes about men in prison. So
He also at one point in the movie says, "Oh, I'll be fine. I'm charming." I was like, "Yes, yes, Mr. Russell, you absolutely are."
Tune
All
into the
right,
podcast this week.
so to wrap things up, let's do some reviews, review scores. So I personally think I'm gonna give this a two jailhouse shower scenes. out of 5. I actually think this is a 1.5 jailhouse shower scenes out of 5, but Kurt Russell and Terry Hatcher being in it um, bump it up another half a point in my book. So I am at a 2.
Ooh.
Dash.
I'm gonna echo that, and I'm gonna give this 2 Kurt Russells in drag out of 5. I thought that it looked great. Like, we talked about the cinematography. Kurt Russell I thought was great, and again, like, there was some stuff where I felt like the tone of, there's a lot going in this movie, but I thought the tone of how they played the villain's part, that cartoonishness, showed me that there was some vision in this movie that I just wish was fully explored, and I really enjoyed those scenes. No, I wouldn't say I kind of enjoyed those scenes, and so I did get some enjoyment from this. So I'm going to give it a 2 out of 5.
Awesome. Telly.
Yeah. Rewatching this, I could see why I didn't remember anything, and I'm sure by next week I'll barely
You forgot
remember
it?
anything. So that's a great thing we had this podcast, so I could refer to it. But yeah, it's just nothing that really stands out. Nothing memorable happens in this movie. The performances are not enough to carry the entire movie and make it enjoyable. So I'm gonna have to give this 2 Russell Mullets out of 5.
Oh wow, we were on. That's. I think that might be the first time that we all came with the same score on something.
No.
And of course, it has to be to shit on something.
Yeah, so sorry for your friend that
Yeah,
requested the
Jamie,
movie.
man, I'm sorry, bro. I'm about
Yeah.
to send you a text and be like, bro, you need to watch this again. I can
Yeah,
see him
shout
now
out
too. He's gonna be
to
like, he's gonna go, come on, bro.
You
Come
dumbasses don't
on,
know
bro.
anything.
Gatsby
Yeah.
as well on the
I
same.
love you, Jamie, man. I love you.
Yeah, this was recommended by 2, so shout out to RaspyGatsby.
There you go,
Yeah,
Tarazi as well. Do you think that he recommended it as something that he loved, or what do you think it was just like this
I
is
think
no,
a
I
movie that I
know.
normally
like to
people
talk about
recommend movies because
that they love?
they enjoy them and they want to hear other people sing its praises. Unfortunately, yeah, this was not one of them.
But I think
You know,
also, like, the thing with this podcast that I'm learning, especially on some of the movies, that I don't think as, I mean, I watch a movie, I don't then analyze and critique it for an hour and a half directly after. So,
that's fair.
talking about movies, like even some stuff that I love, like on another viewing way later, because there's been movies that I've watched, very recently that I haven't seen in over 20 something years, and
Mm.
sometimes they don't they don't hold up as well as we thought, or under scrutiny you're like, damn, that doesn't make sense.
Roasted the
I
glass.
could have sworn.
I'm not gonna lie. I've actually had during the course of some of these that we've done. I've actually changed my score mid pod based on things that were brought up during the pod. So I think you're 100% right. It's funny. Also, one last thing I wanted to throw in there is that Tango and Cash was nominated for 3 Golden Raspberry Awards
Oh wow.
for Worst Actor, Sylvester Stallone, Worst Supporting Actress, Kurt Russell in Drag, and Worst Screenplay.
Wow.
Oh man.
Yeah,
Well,
it
they were
seems
laughing
like
all the way to the bank on this
that's
one. So
true. You're
Yeah.
absolutely right. That's absolutely right.
And
All
given
right,
all
so
of that, still a household name in the buddy comedy space. So
mhm.
I don't know if we're just 3 dudes with an unpopular
yeah.
opinion,
Yeah, maybe
or
this is a hot take.
yeah, like Tango and Cash will not be stopped by by us
By
at
us.
all. So
Well, what's interesting though, last thing I'll say, this is this film, the next couple of films for Stallone are Rocky Five, but that's when he goes on to his like comedy phase and does Oscar and Stop or My Mom Will Shoot.
wow, I
So
forgot
I
Terrible.
all
guess the
about
Terrible.
success of this movie probably gassed him up and say, "Hey, I can do comedy."
yeah.
That was pretty
Yeah,
good. Didn't
yeah.
Kurt
See,
Russell
there
at
you
one
go.
point make fun of his accent too? He was like, I don't know. Yeah. He's like,
Briefly,
you
not
got
as good
nothing.
as Rob Schneider did in Judge Dredd, but yeah.
No, yeah, that's right. I am the law. All right. Thanks so much, everybody. This is Tango and Cash. Before we go, I believe Telly has the pick for the next film that we'll be covering. What's up, Telly?
Yeah,
The floor's
I've
yours.
been wanting to do this, but especially after Tango and Cash, I think this is an interesting comparison. This is the 1991 classic, The Last Boy Scout,
Oh,
with
nice. Okay.
Bruce Willis and Damon Wayans, directed
Wow, I
by
haven't
Tony
seen that in
Scott.
forever. Okay.
Same.
Yeah, yeah,
This will
that's a
be
good
we'll be
choice.
back on
Wow.
the everyone's. You've seen this before, Telly, or first watch?
I've seen Last Boy Scout. I've seen it a million times. I had the laser disc, and just yeah, that movie just is I mean, I haven't seen it in a while, but I just remember it being just very funny. The dialogue, the banter, the chemistry. I think in some ways it overshadows the action because it's just funny watching these two guys bounce work off of each other.
Well, I can't wait to tell you you're wrong, and the comedy would felt
Yeah,
flat.
we'll
No,
see.
I haven't seen this in
Well, I mean, also too, I
forever.
think
So.
both of them are noted curmudgeons, the two actors. So
Uh-huh.
it's interesting to see. I haven't seen this movie since it came out in the theaters. I don't think. It'd be interesting to see how that plays off each other, right? These two notably curmudgeonly actors on and off set. So yeah, that's a great pick. I can't wait. Looking forward to it.
Oh yeah, same.
With that, I just want to thank you, gentlemen, for joining me and having this insightful and enlightening conversation over this terrible movie. Not terrible, but not great. Great movie. But I appreciate you guys taking the time out, and to everybody listening and watching, thank you so much for tuning in to Shoot Punch Kick. We want to ask if everyone could please like, comment, subscribe. We'd
And
really
keep
like to get
recommending stuff. We're not gonna
Yeah.
shit on all
everything. We promise you.
recommendations.
We'll like something eventually. So yeah,
We gotta like something.
drop your recommendations and suggestions in the comments, and
Yeah.
we'll get to them.
100%.
Yeah, and also, I mean, again, listen, I'm not giving anybody homework, but if you guys know that this is going to be the next movie we're watching and you're interested in kind of our takes, please join the conversation with us. Watch the movie too, and put some of your thoughts in the comment section of that podcast. If you didn't agree with the things that we said about this movie, please feel free to put some comments in there too, so we can start a dialogue with you. We're trying to really nurture this burgeoning community.
Yeah, we're
So
open minded. Tell us we're wrong.
yeah, tell us
Convince us.
everything we said was completely
Yeah.
wrong.
Mhm.
Yeah. So once again, thanks everybody. This is Carlos, Dash, and Telly from Shoot Punch Kick, and we're out.